Hi everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome to the start of a new vlog. So back in 2020, I started a new series on my channel where I tried to read a good majority or a good chunk of a author's bibliography. Basically, I'm trying to read a big chunk of an author's work, if not their entire back catalog of stuff. So far, the authors I've chosen haven't had a lot of books, so I've been able to read everything that they've written. I started off with Karen Russell, who is a speculative, fabulous writer, and then I went into Ted Chiang, who is more sci-fi based, but still has like that speculative, fabulous flair. And in this round, we are going to be diving into Octavia Butler. This series is pushing me to read things that I've always wanted to read, but it's specifically to challenge the way I think about genres, the way I think about writing. It's really to help inspire me as a writer of these kind of genres. It's kind of to supplement some of the schooling that I didn't feel like I was receiving at my graduate education, because fabulous sci-fi genre literary fiction, it's slowly being read in the classroom, but still not as much as I would have liked. And I feel like this series has really helped me to make me think about things, to make me think about how I approach my writing, how I approach it similarly to these authors, how I approach it differently to these authors. And I've always wanted to read Octavia Butler. I've never read any of her work, and I've always wanted to. Octavia Butler is she's known as the queen of the sci-fi genre of the 20th century. And I'm really surprised because I feel like even though she's really reputable, even though she's really well known, you still don't read a ton of her in high school, graduate school, college, which I feel like is a really big shame. She's so well received, like why don't we read her more? At least at the places I attended, I didn't read her. She was just kind of somebody I knew about in the background but never approached. This vlog, we are going to be doing that. So let's get to know Octavia. So Octavia Butler was born in 1947 in Pasadena, California, and raised by a widowed mother. She lives in Pasadena, which is really close kind of to where I grew up. She's like about an hour away from where I grew up. She's a lot closer to Los Angeles than I was. Growing up, she said she was very introverted and shy and began to read and write specifically sci-fi and fantasy stuff. And then she went to college during the Black Power movement, which really influenced her and her writing. And then during college, she was encouraged to attend the Clarion workshop, which is a workshop I also would like to attend at some point. And then by 1970, she had sold a couple short stories and had become a full-time writer. And in 1970, she was 23, 24. You know, I'm already 25 and haven't had anything published, so she's already pretty admirable. She achieved her goal of becoming a writer. Unfortunately, she died in 2006 at the age of 58. She was really prolific in the 30 plus years that she was writing, and so to have lost her so early is, you know, really sad because, you know, she didn't get to finish all of her series. I'm sure there was other things that she wanted to write. There are a lot of unfinished novels. Some of them have been released, some of them haven't. We lost a great early on, but she's still kind of known as the big person of the sci-fi genre. She's still seen as like the forefront of the Afrofuturist genre as well. I've never really gravitated towards older sci-fi stuff. A lot of it is very dude bro and just never has interested me, but obviously Octavia Butler is not a white dude bro, so she's always been interesting to me in that aspect, writing sci-fi in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but definitely from a very particular lens that's very different than what we were getting a lot of in that time period. So let's go over her works. So she started off writing a lot of short stories, but her first series was the Patternist series, or the Seeds to Harvest series, which is The Pattern Master, which was published in 1976, which is her first novel published. And then the series continues with Minds of Mind, Survivor, and Wild Seed. Wild Seed is a pretty well-known book. I feel like people read it independently, so maybe this series is one that you can read without reading the entire series. From there, she has the Exogenous series, which starts with Dawn in 1987, and then Adult Rights, and then Imago. And from there, you have the Parables series, which is probably her most well-known series, which is The Parables of the Sower and Parables of the Talents. And the first book was published in 1993. And then from there, she has a couple standalones. Kindred, which was written in 1979, which I feel like is her most well-known novel. And then Fledgling, which was written in 2005. She also has some short story collections, which was Bloodchild and Other Stories, and then Unexpected Stories, which was published after her death in 2014. And she also has written a lot of essays, and I'm really interested in some of that writing as well. I was looking like on YouTube for just like some videos that like talked about her. There are a couple videos that are done by Princess Weeks on the PBS It's Lit channel. She does one on Afrofuturism, and then she does one specifically on Octavia Butler, which I have watched. But there's not really any videos that really get into the meat of her as a person, so I'm interested in looking up her essays, looking up her interviews, and really delving into who she was and what she was writing about. I just want to know more about her because I just find her a really, really interesting writer and historical figure. But yes, let's get into the books that I own and kind of where I want to go with this vlog. So the first book I have is Parables of the Sower, which was her last series that she started and didn't complete. And this book is following a young 15-year-old girl who lives in the distant future of 2024. And in this world, basically the United States has gone to chaos. It's kind of a lawless state. It's still like a collective of the United States, but it is not what it once was. And our main character, she lives in this like safety hub almost of this like walled neighborhood, and basically outside of any of these walled neighborhoods that exist, it's just drugs, rape, murder, all of that bad stuff, and you never know what's going to happen to you. And our main character is really struggling to not find her place. She knows exactly what she wants. She's struggling to get her father's permission to do what she wants because she doesn't think it's going to always be the same. She's looking realistically at the future of, we're eventually going to have to leave this community because it's not going to work out. She's the daughter of the town's priest, and she has her own thoughts on religion and is making a collective novel guidebook about religion, about how God isn't the stationary figure, how he is change. I'm a little over 80 pages into this and I'm really enjoying it so far. It's a really interesting read. We've just kind of seen Lauren going through her day-to-day life, her struggles of trying to get the things she wants to happen, and just kind of introduced to the world at large. It's really interesting because this was written in the 90s and there's so many parallels to like what we're experiencing now, so many things that just seem really relevant in a 2021 world. Yes, I'm really excited to continue reading this, and honestly, I kind of want to read both of these novels for the vlog. There's 2 novels that have been printed. This vlog, I'm like, I don't know how long it's going to go for, don't know how long I'm going to be able to just read one author continuously. You know, I get really tired in these vlogs sometimes, but it's just like, I'm looking at her bibliography and I'm just like, so many of these books I want to read, so many of them interest me. So the next book we have on here is Kindred, and this is again one of her more well-known standalone novels, if not her most well-known novel, and this is about a woman who gets sucked into the past, into slave times. How she's getting pulled into time is very disorganized. Like, she doesn't know when it's going to happen. It just starts to happen to her at odd times. So I don't really know much more than that, but it's still really well acclaimed. It seems to have held up really well, so I'm really interested in reading this. And honestly, when I went to the bookstore, I was kind of picking random books. Like, I kind of knew that I wanted to read Kindred and Parables of the Sower. I want to read Fledgling as well, and there's some other books on here like Wild Seed that I wanted to read. But I was kind of picking books at random, especially because it seems like whenever I go to Barnes & Noble, Octavia Butler is not super well stocked. Like, they always have Kindred and Parable of the Sower there, but it seems like they do not keep like a big backlog of her books, which again attests to my sentiment that like a lot of people aren't reading this for school because a lot of people aren't buying it in the bookstore, so they're not keeping a lot of copies in stock. She's still really easily accessible. She doesn't have any books that are out of print, I don't believe, but just like getting things in a bookstore is more difficult. I will have to order a lot of these online. But one book that I did see in the store, which I ended up picking up, was Dawn. I had no reference for this. I didn't know it was a series. I didn't know what it was. I just picked it because I thought the new cover was stunning. So this is luckily the first book in the series, and from what I know, this series has to deal with aliens coming down to Earth, and I believe they make the humans breed both with each other and with them. I don't really know more than that. So I will finish all 3 of these books and kind of give my thoughts and opinions about her and her craft going forward. But I don't know what else I'm going to be picking up for this vlog. I mean, hopefully Fledgling. Maybe I will finish both of these series here. But I am really, really intrigued by her work, especially because her sci-fi is a very big range of stuff. You know, we have things that are considered very literary, that are about time travel. We have aliens, we have post-apocalyptic or almost apocalyptic. There is a wide range of this kind of sci-fi scope that she is dealing with. But it seems that there are a lot of similar themes that are kind of coming across the board, like race, slavery. I think gender is going to be a big thing in that as well. and kind of how those different things intersect with each other. But yes, I'm excited to see what kind of themes that she's working with. I'm excited to really figure out her writing style and how she approaches things, because so far how this is written is very, very interesting. It definitely reads very literary, or at least it reads very similar to other like books from the 70s and 80s that I read that are not sci-fi. This has almost like a diary journalistic style to it because of how the character is narrating, so I'm very interested to see if this style kind of goes into her other works. I'm not sure if she only writes in first person. I'm assuming she doesn't, but I'm excited to see kind of what her style is, how she approaches things. So far, it seems to be really accessible reading-wise, but she is approaching really difficult topics and really difficult concepts, so I'm really excited to see like just what she does and how she does it. Let's get started on this reading vlog. Just a little bit about me, my life. I moved to New York this last month. It is September 1st, so I've only been here like 2-3 weeks. I moved in here on the 15th, 16th, and so my main prerogative in life is my roommate and I are still like buying stuff for our living room, trying to get our setup out there. I'm pretty much done with my bedroom, but you know, we're still moving in, we're still trying to situate ourselves, and I'm trying to find a job. I recently just graduated in May, and kind of on the back burner of that is I should be writing. It's hard because I'm trying to find a job. I'm making my usual bookish content and trying to like stay up to that. I also would like to be an author, published, you know, before the time I'm 30. That would be nice. I have some short stories from my thesis that I'm working on that I, you know, should be working to try and get published again. I sent things out during my thesis, after my thesis, and I've been rejected from all of my publications, which is, you know, normal, but I'm trying to rework a particular story and send that one out, and then hopefully work on some new stuff, work on some old stuff. But yeah, lots of stuff going on in my life, a whole city to explore, and a whole new author to explore. So I'm gonna go get started with that. So it is September 3rd, which means a couple days has passed, and a lot has happened in those 2 days, mainly a hurricane, a tropical storm, if you will, flooding. So it's been a time. We're fine in our apartment. We didn't really get that much stuff. Our laundry room is flooded, but that is not that bad compared to a lot of people. I'm reading this. I am almost done, as you can see. I only have like 50-60 pages left, but today it is like the first weekend where both Dan, my roommate, and I have been in the apartment together, so we are going to try and get brunch, which I know it seems not nice. I don't know, it seems like we don't give a fuck about the rest of New York because we're, you know, just trying to find brunch on a Friday. It's just how it is. So yeah, we're gonna go do that. So I'm back after a long day of walking around. It was a lot of fun. We ate tea, we went to the park, we went to Shakespeare & Co., which is where I got 2 books. So I got A Close and Common Orbit, which is the second book in the Long Way to a Small Angry Planet series, and I never see this at Barnes & Noble, so I had to get it. And then on the sale rack, I saw Science Fiction and Fantasy, like Best of America series, and I'm very intrigued to read this, put it against my own work, compare, contrast. This isn't the Norton Best American Fiction, like, book series, I don't think, so I'm very intrigued, like, where this anthology comes from, learn more about it. But yeah, for the rest of the night, I am hopefully just gonna be relaxing, resting my feet. I just did laundry too. It was a day. We're going to finish this and then I will talk about it at length. I have to collect my thoughts on it because I feel like the story is so nuanced. It covers so many different topics, so many different themes. It's very layered. It's a very layered book with the issues that it kind of approaches. I feel like a lot of novels now, they're trying to distinctly say something very particular, and sometimes that can kind of overwhelm the actual story, whereas this, it's very story character forward, and because of that, not that the message is lost in the plot, but it's definitely very layered and complex. It's very interpretable, you know, like I don't think Butler is trying to say one particular thing, which is very interesting for this kind of a book. Especially now, I feel like dystopians are very, like, not obvious, but they're very blunt in, like, what they're trying to do. Actually, in the past, like, you know, you think of 1984 and Animal Farm, Brave New World, all of those kind of books I feel like are kind of straightforward in what they're trying to portray, which is, like, the future is bad if we keep going in the direction that we're going. And like, yes, is some of that here. Like the things I'm picking up on, I think are very different, you know, as a 2021 audience than like the 1990s audience that would have been reading this book. It's very layered, very complex, and I think it's a very different reading in the present time than it is now. And so I want to finish it and then collect my thoughts and figure out how to talk about it because it is very interesting. But yeah, now it's time to relax. So I just finished Parable of the Sower on September 4th, so it only took me like 4 or 5 days to read this, which great. Hopefully we can keep a good pace up. And I'm just like left with a lot of thoughts, none of them really like comprehensible. I'm still like trying to figure out how I feel about this book. It's told through like the journal entries of the main character Lauren going from like 15 to like almost 19. So we get a lot of her growing up, what her community is like, and then when she flees her community, we get a lot of her on the road, facing obstacles, facing bad situations. It reminds me a lot of The Road by Cormac McCarthy, The Power by Naomi Adderman, I think. But it has elements of what you would expect from a dystopian, from an apocalyptic story, but it is told through journals, so it is, I wouldn't say it's vignettes, it's very like slice of life. There isn't like a big thing, you know, of them trying to like overthrow a government or like fix the situation or anything. It's just people trying to survive, people trying to live their lives in these harsh times. So I'm just reading the biography at the back of this, and it says she was a renowned African-American writer who received a MacArthur Genius Grant and a Penn West Lifetime Achievement Award for her body of work. She was the author of several award-winning novels, including Parable of the Talents, which won the Nebula for Best Novel, acclaimed for her lean prose, strong protagonists, and social observations and stories that range from the distant past to the far futures. And it just kind of goes on, just, you know, talking about her work. It's hard to tell because this is like vignette, like slice of life. It is through the narrator's particular first-person journal entries. The prose is lean, but like not in a bad way. It's just, it's concise. The story keeps moving. The strong characters are definitely what hold this story together, that really compel you through the novel. And the strong character work really supports that like social commentary aspect, because there is a lot of really interesting layers to the story. As I said, the main character is disabled and she has like a disability where she can feel other people's feelings and it can hurt her. So it's kind of like a magical ailment, but it's like a real thing that she really has to deal with in this story. So that's a layer. This book brings up her race, you know, as an African-American woman. Everybody else, you know, it's highly remarked upon about like how their race plays into the privilege that they have, the abilities that they have. And because they are a racially diverse group, it can actually put them in harm's way because of certain kind of other people who don't like that kind of thing. So it's very much aware of itself with race, with gender, with the confines that those things bring up as they try to survive. This book is very much aware of like the characters and where they sit in this world and the privilege and power that they have because of the way they look, act, the abilities they can do. This book is also really interesting. I've talked on like the healthcare aspect and like kind of paying for any kind of service, which is it's very dystopian in here, but it's not too dissimilar from what we have now. Privatized systems, slavery, and the idea of like debt slavery becomes a really big focus in the later half of this book as a real fear that these people are worried about. There's a lot about guns, and you know, the main characters have to use guns. They have to build up that skill. It's very important to them and their survival. The main characters don't want to kill people. They don't want to hurt people, but gun safety, being able to use a gun well, is also like really important to these characters as a mode for survival. But it also builds into like the Second Amendment rights thing, of America and like how guns and gun control is just like so important to America. And we see so many bad people using weapons, using guns in a bad way. It's really nuanced, really complex. It's just so many different, like, this novel could not happen anywhere else except in America. This novel takes place specifically in California, which I think is really interesting because I grew up there, so I really know like them walking around, like it really feels relatable and understandable to me. Just like it couldn't have happened anywhere else. It's set in this particular place and time for a reason because it really brings nuance to all these different layers and things that like happen in the book that are commented on the book. But again, the book isn't like necessarily saying one thing good, bad, or the other besides like slavery bad. It definitely makes a stand on like slavery is bad, but for the most part, like the guns stuff, the relationships that are formed, like it's just very nuanced and complex, and you really just have to like, at least I feel this way, that I'm just kind of sitting with this book, just kind of thinking and feeling about it. This book is so fascinating, and I feel like it would be such a good read for like modern high school and college students to be reading, especially at this time in their life right now. I remember when I was 15, I had to read The Road as an option. Like, The Road and Parable of the Sower is pretty dark. I would say The Road is a slightly more graphic, but Parable of the Sower doesn't really shy away from things either. I feel like these are very comparable, and I wonder why we don't read Parable of the Sower instead. I'm trying to think of other like dystopian-ish things that we were reading back then. 1984, Brave New World, even like The Hunger Games, like why are those picked up and not this one? This book is very grim, it's very dark. What I find really interesting is that a lot of the older characters are looking back and saying, to an extent, they want to go back to how things were, but a lot of the characters have just kind of sat with this feeling of like seeing America crumble and just being like, we're never going to be able to return to that point. There's no going back at this point. I wouldn't say there's hopelessness though. This book is very like straightforward. It's very realistic. It's not pessimistic or optimistic. It's very neutral to like humans will always survive. They are going to have to go through hardships, but they will survive. But the America as we know it has not survived. Even with characters looking to the past, wanting America to return to what it was, the book, again, is, especially Lauren, the main character, is really realistic to the fact that, like, America wasn't so great in the past either, that they always had problems, that these things have always existed in America. Slavery has always existed in America. Yeah, there's just a lot to think about with this book. It's really complex. There's a lot of stuff. It's not just talking about one thing. It's talking about a whole bunch of different things and commenting on a whole bunch of different things. I really want to read the next novel and get more of that. But for now, I am going to either pick up Kindred or Dawn next. But before that, I'm going to pick up Legendborn and just kind of have a breather, just have a break, read something else that's a little more fun. I think YA will be a good break from this to just kind of sit and stew with this novel. But yes, Parable of the Sower went really well, really, really fascinating. And I'm excited to see how Octavia Butler approaches different kind of stories because, again, this is told in a very particular journaling style. Interested to see how she approaches third-person narration, to see if it's different. Those are my thoughts so far. This is going well. I'm just going to keep up with this vlog for the rest of the month because I want to read so much of her work now. I'm so fascinated and intrigued. Hello everyone, it is September 13th and I'm getting back into reading Octavia Butler for this reading challenge. I took a week-ish break to read Legendborn, kind of cleanse my palate so that I am prepped and ready for the next book. And as I kind of flashed, I am reading Kindred now. I started this last night, so I'm only like 75 pages into it, and so far I really like it. So in Kindred, our main character, Dana, is somehow, for some reason, being pulled into the past, into the antebellum South. So it's about her, we get more about her life, but we also get her trying to survive in the antebellum South and trying to figure out what's going on with her, what's happening. I normally don't tend to read time travel novels. I don't especially like them a lot of times. One of my favorite books is This Is How We Lose the Time War, which I think is a good example of working with time in an interesting way. I feel like a lot of books that deal with time and time travel are just very generic. They feel very much like the time travel episode of a movie or a TV show. And I know there's ones that deal with it in interesting ways, but I personally am never really interested in like the time travel paradox situation of like, oh no, we have to do this thing or else the world won't be the same. Oh wait, us making all these mistakes is what makes the world the same. And Kindred so far is really avoiding kind of those generic tropes and cliches because it's really focused on the characters surviving, figuring out stuff. She literally tells one of the characters like what is happening to her, which a lot of times they kind of avoid being outright and out forth with the past characters and not telling them things. So I really appreciated that element, and I'm just really excited to see where this goes. I'm not super far into it again, so I'm just kind of enjoying as the story unravels and seeing what happens. But this is probably her most well-known novel, her like most read novel, I'm assuming. I feel like if people have read Octavia Butler in school, they have probably read this one in particular. I really enjoy it, and I think it would make a really good reading experience for people in college, higher education, because it's very, very accessible. It's rooted in the characters' feelings and emotions. It's very straightforward. The writing style is very parse in like a very good way. Octavia Butler is very straightforward. She doesn't pull her punches, but being straightforward allows her to explore so much nuance and interesting things. And one thing that I'm really excited about this edition is that in the back there is actually a critical essay. And like, I haven't read the essay yet. I'm going to read it when I finish the book, but I'm just really excited that like a book included like a critical essay because, you know, I'm an English major in college. I like reading that kind of stuff. I honestly might look into even more stuff because I would love to see like kind of how people discuss and talk about this book in a academic setting. I'm really interested by this, and I can see how this book influenced so many other books that I have read. M.K. Jemisin wrote something for Parable of the Sower, and I can tell that she has read this book too. I think even like Legendborn, which I just recently read, has taken some influence from this, especially like the idea of like ghosts from past traumas, from ancestry trauma, like coming back. I can just see like how big of an influence this is on stuff, and I'm really, really enjoying it for that aspect. So I'm just going to continue reading this. I think going a little bit slower with this reading vlog was a really good idea to just like give myself time to digest things, to give myself space to read other authors and then go into this stuff. I've done this reading vlog twice, and I feel like I get burnt out really quickly reading the same author's stuff. I think one thing that works in Octavia Butler's favor, again, is that she writes such different stuff, and what I'm reading is mostly novels versus short stories, which I did in the past. I think that is also helping with that situation. But also, I think I might just be enjoying Octavia Butler the most so far. I love Karen Russell. I love her writing. When her stories stick, they like really stick with me. And for Ted Chiang, I feel like I just learned so much about my own style. There were so many stories that I just really, really enjoyed and thought were really complex and interesting. But I would say like this doesn't tire me out in the same way that reading those two authors did. This is not relaxing. There's obviously a lot of trauma and pain in these novels that she writes, but I would say like plot-wise, character-wise, I might be enjoying it the most out of everything, just from like a physical reading standpoint. With a lot of like lit fic and speculative fic, when I look back on those stories, I have like a lot of fondness for them, and I love like dissecting them after the fact. But for Kindred, it's like the most enjoyable reading in the process kind of experience, if that makes sense. But yeah, I'm gonna continue this reading vlog, finish Kindred up, and then start Dawn. So yeah, very exciting stuff here. So it's the 14th and I just finished Kindred. I literally read like the first 75 pages on the first day, and then the last like 60 pages on the third day, which means I read like almost 200 pages of this novel on like the second day of like the full day that I was reading this book. So yes, I read this incredibly quickly. It's a very, very gripping book, a really compelling book. Like I've said, Octavia Butler's style is very parse. It's very dialogue heavy, especially this book. Parable of the Sower is diary entries, so it is a lot less dialogue heavy, but that kind of very parse, concise style really stays through all of her novels, no matter if it's like narrative or journal entries. But yes, this was a really compelling novel. This was written, I believe, in the 70s, in 1979, and it just feels so contemporary still. And some of the more egregious moments of like being in the 70s and knowing that like racism and microaggression still exist, you know, it's kind of sad that those things still feel very contemporary, obviously. But yeah, this was a really compelling book. Like I've said, it follows a young woman who keeps getting pulled into the South to basically help one of her ancestors, and it's kind of like the brutal violence that she has to endure to survive on a slave plantation. And it's really harrowing, but it is a really compelling read. I just wanted to keep reading it because it was just so well crafted and so well done and just so interesting. There's so many interesting intersections that the characters' decisions, like Dana's decisions, they can hurt herself, they can hurt other people. There's never really a right or wrong way for her to go about things other than trying to survive as best she can, even if those choices might hurt other people. The characters are not black and white. Like, you have a very morally gray, like, slave owner. Like, he's not a good person. Obviously, he's evil, he has slaves, but at the end of the day, he isn't like this monstrously evil villain type character. He's just like the sad white man who ultimately feels and acts very human because that's what he is. He's a very human person, and it's in apparently human nature to hurt and own other people. There's just so much that's so interesting about this novel and what it says, what it has to say, and I love that it's presenting everything. It's not like she's trying to be subtle about the takes that she's giving, but also Octavia Butler doesn't like write out these long monologues either, so the messages and themes are very much for you to figure out and decide for yourself, but she doesn't shy away from the horrors, from the realistically bad things that happen to these people. I just really enjoyed it. I'm gonna read the critical essay now, and then I'm going to take another break, read a different type of novel. I think I'm reading Redemptor next, which is the second and final book in the Raybearer series, which I'm been really excited for. So I think I'm gonna take a break, read that, and then I will get into my third and possibly final Octavia Butler novel for this vlog, at least, because as far as I'm concerned, I want to read Octavia Butler's entire catalog now. I am invested. I'm very invested. Hello, I'm back. It is September 26th, so the last week in September, and I actually have the apartment alone this week because my roommate is going home for some like appointments and stuff. I'm gonna miss him, but it's also like nice to enjoy the apartment by myself. Through the entirety of COVID, I have been living on my own in my own apartment. I've like gone home obviously for periods of time because I was in school, but like during the school year, like I was inside by myself, going to class by myself, and not going out that much because of COVID regulations in Massachusetts. So it was weird, but also like I got a little too used to like being on my own. And so I'm like slowly rehabilitating, adapting to having people around. So it's kind of nice to just have some quiet. But I'm back because I'm reading my final book for this vlog, which is Dawn by Octavia Butler, because this is an Octavia Butler vlog. And so far, I am really enjoying this. This novel takes place in like a near-ish future where basically Earth has started World War III and destroyed themselves to the point that Earth is gone. Not like the planet itself, but like Earth and life is gone. These aliens stepped in to kind of save humankind, and they are trying to rehabilitate them to put them back on Earth. And so it's really fascinating. This is the first third-person perspective novel, I think, that I've read so far from Octavia Butler, so we get like a lot more details about the aliens and the planet. There's a lot more scenic dressing than some of her other books, but it still has like that very clipped, straightforward prose style that we've seen in all of her work. And I will say, like, besides like some of the content things, if you gave me this prose, I would not know that it wasn't written in 2020. Like, it just, her novels feel so contemporary in style, in thematic stuff. I'm sure that there are some really great essays that people have written discussing this book and like the themes of colonialism, the themes of race and culture. I can definitely see like a big metaphor working here, but the story works so well on its own that, you know, read the story without thinking those things, but it's so obvious that this was influenced by like ideas of colonialism and slavery, by how the aliens like treat people, they treat them with like kindness and gentleness, and they definitely like aren't shipping them off and like making them slaves and stuff, but there definitely is like erasure of culture, forcing them, getting them to do what they want them to do, telling them, you know, that they have to breed and make more children and kind of a thing. Some of my greatest fears, honestly. But this book is just so interesting, and it feels so contemporary in its themes and its style, and I want people to rediscover this. Like, this would make such great literature for high school students, for college students. Honestly, I feel like this feels a lot closer to us and to readers than a lot of other texts that we were made to read in high school. And the same goes for Parable of the Sower and Kindred too. Like, these books just feel so contemporary and so in our 2020 moment. I've read books from like the 70s and 80s before, and they don't always feel this close to us. I don't know what it is, just Octavia Butler just was writing ahead of her time. And I know she's very well renowned and, you know, very well received, but I feel like we're still not reading her enough because I never had to read her in school. But I will say, this book is really interesting because the aliens of society a little bit differently. Alien species, they are fully alien species. They're kind of slightly humanoid, but for the most part, they are very alien creatures, which I really appreciate because it just always makes alien stories a lot more fascinating and a lot more interesting. The one thing in this book that I think would be written differently if it was in 2020 is that the gender in their society is a little bit different than ours. There are 3-ish genders. There might be more. We've seen 3-ish genders now. And the third gender, they call it. They refer to them as it. And obviously, some people do use its pronouns, but it's a lot more common to see they, them pronouns. And I personally, in my head, I am correcting it to they, them because that feels more appropriate. The aliens that use its pronouns are not liked by the main character, and so she has this one line where she says like it deserves to be called it because it's so grotesque or something, which just made me feel a little bit uncomfy associating calling it an it's because it's so alien or so unlike them. That made me a little uncomfy, you know, a little weird, but for the time, I'm sure that this is very revolutionary in its gender ideals. I would love to read The Left Hand of Darkness next to kind of compare it, because I know that also deals with gender and genderlessness, something like that. But yes, I am excited to see where this novel continues to go. So far, it's a very quiet, disturbing, like nothing truly bad is happening to the main character. The aliens do mean the best for these characters, like they're trying to give them everything, but at the same time there is this like deep sinisterness because of they aren't allowed writing utensils. There's kind of hints that probably they will erase all of their culture from them, even though they have it saved, that they will not allow them to keep their cultures, like keep their cultural writings and records, which is just devastating to me as a reader. Like, that is just like one of the most horrible things that humankind has done to others and continues to do. And obviously, like, the coerced sexual relations or creating children, like, I wonder how like that's gonna go, how they're going to procreate and what it's going to look like, and if it is going to be forced. I'm really interested. This book is really fascinating, and it still hits home today, which is amazing because this book was written in 1987, and you know, it still feels so close to 2020, which is amazing. I am about 80 pages into this, so I have 200 pages left. I'm going to read this maybe today, maybe this week, and I'm just excited to finish this and talk more about my final thoughts on this vlog because it has been a really good time. So I just finished Dawn, which means we are at the end of this reading vlog. So I will briefly discuss a little bit of Dawn, and then we'll go into my final thoughts about all of these novels. This was terrifying. It's a very subtle terrifying. Again, Octavia Butler is very straightforward. She doesn't hide her themes. Like, they're very present in the text, but she also isn't shoving it down your throat. She's not making it a very obvious metaphor, if that makes sense. The themes and stuff are obvious because they're very present in the text. Like, colonialism is happening to the characters, so obviously it's making some kind of commentary on colonialism. There's themes of power and sex and race in here because things are happening to the characters. Octavia Butler doesn't necessarily make exact commentary on those things. They're just happening in the text and you kind of have to interpret as you go. This novel is third person, and like all of her novels, we are somewhat distant from the main character. Even these that are in first person, we are still somewhat distant from the main character, so we understand like what she's feeling and what she's saying, but we don't necessarily get into like these complex like philosophical things. That's kind of what you do as the reader, which I really appreciate. Like there's so many ways that this can be discussed and analyzed because it is not subtle, but it doesn't really make direct commentary on those things. So this book is really interesting, especially with ideas of colonialism, with ideas of consent. The humans are going to have to mate with the aliens and with each other to create these alien hybrids. Like that's just what these alien populations do, and that's their way of life. And obviously it's taking certain freedoms away from the characters because they do not want this to happen. They want their humanity. They want to create real humans. They're not given the choice whether they want to have sex, whether they don't want to have sex. Their feelings, their bodies are manipulated to want things and to desire things and to do certain things. The characters will explicitly say, I do not want to do this, but because their bodies and feelings say otherwise, like their brain chemistry says otherwise, the aliens still enact upon those things because their body isn't saying no. So it's like, ooh, it's really real. Like, ooh, it's hitting home. Especially for me, I've talked about this, like being asexual, aromantic, like this is one of my greatest fears, is like being forced or coerced into having like sexual desires or being forced to have sex, have children. Like that is just, that's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. The only question I did have during this book is that like, where are the gay people? Like, did they not wake them up? Did they change their brain chemistry so that they're not those things? Like that is like my biggest question. Octavia Butler has had gay characters, side characters in her books, and also like they start to think that some of the characters are gay in this book, or like they use that kind of slur to demean people, the other humans that they don't want to like be associated with or who they don't want to think of as human. And so like it's obvious that Octavia Butler is like aware of gay people, but like can you imagine like if someone they awoke was gay and they were like forced to be in a partnership that they didn't want to be in? Like that would just add like another layer onto this. But this book as it stands is like the aliens are nice, they're good, they're helping, they're doing stuff for them, but there's always a price for what they're doing, and in a lot of ways it is taking away their humanity. And so this is really hard to read because it's obvious that the main character is grappling with these things. She's come to have family among the aliens, she's come to trust and respect in certain ways, but at the same time like she is having her consent taken away from her. She's being forced to do certain things that she doesn't want to do. And so it's a very complicated relationship. It's a lot like Kindred in that way, where the captor-kidnappee relationship is really complex and complicated, and it's obvious that like the aliens are doing wrong, but at the same time like it's not making them pure evil kind of a thing, which I really appreciate how Octavia Butler handles like the real evils of the world by showing like how human they are or how just people think they are and doing the things that they do. I want to read this entire series now because this was so absolutely terrifying, but it was also so compelling. Like just I read this over 2 days. I didn't even have to use an audiobook for it, which I've really been struggling with reading without an audiobook helping me to physically read. This book was just that good, and it's a really good alien sci-fi novel. I tend to not reach for alien stuff because it scares me and terrifies me. It's all my worst fears, but this was just so compelling and so good, and I think it is because it comes from the angle of being very aware of the colonial themes that aliens and extraterrestrials possess in their stories. This was me reading, tasting, sampling Octavia Butler's work, and I can say that this was a really successful reading challenge. She approaches topics that I'm also interested in approaching in my writing, but she does it in a very different way. She's very straightforward with her writing. She kind of lets the dialogue and actions speak for themselves, which I would say I like to do, but maybe I need to do more of that. I really liked this book in particular because it was in third person. We got a lot more descriptions, especially descriptions of the aliens and the planet and the ship and all that. I also like to have scenic descriptions when I read, and I like a little bit more contemplative narrative. Like I would love to see a little bit more of the interior of these different women's minds and like what they're thinking, but overall these did work very well, and I think they did what they were supposed to and what Octavia Butler was trying to set out to do. These books are really complicated and complex, and they make you think a whole bunch after, which is why I appreciate that she didn't just hand us everything, hand us her themes, because everything is so complicated by the ideals versus like the reality of what these characters have to go through. Just bad things happen, complicated things happen, things that the characters are okay with and maybe you as a reader are not okay with, and you kind of have to deal with that. This was really successful because I have already bought the second and final book in this series, and I want to read the rest of this series, and I want to read her novels and short stories. Maybe there's a part 2 coming where I just continue to read Octavia Butler, because this was really, really successful. Out of the authors, this was like the most enjoyable reading process. I think I've said this before. I've gotten a lot out of reading everybody, but this was like actually really enjoyable as I was reading. Like I was really enjoying the books as I was reading them and not just like after and thinking about them. The other thing to take away is that we should be reading more Octavia Butler. Other people should be reading her. We should be reading her in school, because these works are just so close to where we are in 2020. They still speak to our time. I can see the influence of so many writers from Octavia Butler's work, and it's really a shame that we only read one of her books in school, or that we don't read any. She's like well known, but she's still under the radar. She needs more hype. It's compelling. It still reads really, really fresh. It does not read like it's from the 70s and 80s or 90s at all. It reads like it's from 2020, which is crazy. There are obviously some things that have kind of grown out of, like its pronouns for the aliens, some of the word choices, but overall these books, they still feel contemporary, and they still work for readers today in a way that a lot of books from like the 60s and 70s do not work now. But at the end of the day, this was just a really successful reading vlog. I got to read books that talk about themes that I'm interested in a slightly different way than I would approach them, which is just always really pleasant. I love to see how authors approach different themes and stories in ways that are similar yet different, and the themes that she chooses to cover versus the ones I choose to cover was just really, really cool and interesting. Octavia Butler is well known. She has obviously influenced so many writers that we have today, but she needs to make a comeback. I want to see more people reading her, especially like on BookTube and in academic settings, because I think people are missing out by not giving her a chance, because this stuff, it's so good. And yes, I think people will like it. But my camera's dying, so this is the end of the reading vlog. I hope you guys enjoyed me exploring Octavia Butler. I will have more Octavia Butler in the future, I'm sure, because I am kind of obsessed right now. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.